This Christmas, while you're unwrapping gifts, I was desperately trying to avoid becoming one. My holiday job at Northgate Mall came with a set of festive rules that were more about staying alive than spreading cheer. If you ever felt a chill down your spine in an empty mall, you want to hear how I survived this Christmas Eve and why some gifts are better left unopened. The silence of a shopping mall after hours is not peaceful. It is heavy. It presses against your eardrums, a suffocating blanket of dead air that smells of stale cinnamon pretzels, floor wax, and something unmistakably electrical. It was Christmas Eve, 2025, and outside the glass monstrosity of Northgate Mall, the world was buried under 6 inches of fresh snow. Inside, however, it was a perfectly preserved, climate-controlled tomb of consumerism. I stood in the central atrium, the hum of the industrial HVAC system vibrating through the soles of my boots, staring up at the 40-foot plastic tree that loomed like a jagged green mountain in the dim emergency lighting. My name is Elias, and I was a lucky soul who had drawn the short straw for the graveyard shift. Or rather, I was the only one desperate enough for the triple time pay to agree to spend the holiest night of the year babysitting mannequins and locked storefronts. The economy hadn't been kind lately, and the rent on my studio apartment didn't care about holiday spirit. So, when a security firm offered a bonus that could clear my debts in one night, I didn't ask why the previous 3 guards had quit without collecting their final paychecks. I just signed the waiver, put on the polyester uniform that was a size too big, and grabbed my flashlight. Northgate Mall had a reputation. If you lived in the county, you knew the stories. It was a kind of place where kids dared each other to hide in the bathrooms overnight, only to be found the next morning huddled in a corner, unable to speak. Urban legend spoke of a thinness to the reality here, a place where the barrier between our world and something much darker was worn down by decades of greed and artificial light. But I was a pragmatist. I didn't believe in ghost schools or curses. I believed in late fees and eviction notices. I was cynical, tired, and ready to spend 8 hours scrolling through my phone in the security booth. I was wrong. The security office was located in the bowels of service corridors, a windowless concrete box that smelled of cold coffee and old fear. When I arrived for my shift at 10 p.m., the day shift guard, a twitchy man named Henderson, was already packing his bag with frantic, jerky movements. He didn't look me in the eye. He just shoved a clipboard into my chest and muttered, "Read the list, follow the list. Don't be a hero, Elias. Just survive until 6 a.m." Before I could ask him what he meant, he was out the door, practically running toward the exit as if the devil himself were snapping at his heels. I chuckled, shaking my head. "Merry Christmas to you too, buddy," I said to the empty room. I sat down at the desk, the flickering fluorescent bulb above me buzzing like an angry hornet. I looked down at the clipboard. I expected a checklist of doors to lock or fire alarms to check. Instead, on a piece of crinkled yellow paper, someone had typed out a list of instructions in a font that looked like it came from a typewriter in the 1970s. The header read, "Northgate Mall Night Shift Protocols, Christmas Eve." I leaned back, propping my feet up, and began to read. The amusement I felt initially began to curdle into confusion, and then a cold, creeping unease. Rule 1, the midnight dress code. By 11:59 p.m., you must ensure that every mannequin in the main concourse is wearing a Santa hat. We have provided a bag of hats in the maintenance closet. Do not miss one. If a mannequin is left bareheaded when the clock strikes 12, they will take it as an insult. You do not want to insult them. Rule 2, the Phantom Caroler. Between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., you may hear singing echoing from the upper levels. It will sound beautiful, perhaps like a choir or a soloist singing Silent Night. Do not acknowledge it. Do not hum along. Do not look up toward the source. If you acknowledge the song, the singer will come down and perform for an audience of one. Rule 3, the lost and found. There's a package in the lost and found bin, wrapped in blue paper with a silver bow. Under no circumstances are you to open this package. Do not shake it. Do not put your ear against it. If you hear it whispering, walk away immediately and lock the door. The mall spirit is generous, but its gifts are not for the living. I stared at the paper. It had to be a prank, a hazing ritual for the new guy, Henderson, and the other guards were probably laughing their heads off in the parking lot right now. Mannequins taking insults? I scoffed aloud, my voice sounding too loud in the cramped room. Give me a break. I tossed the clipboard onto the desk and grabbed my flashlight. Prank or not, I still had a job to do. I needed to do my rounds. I stepped out of the office and into the service corridor, the heavy metal door clicking shut behind me. The air out here was colder, significantly so. It wasn't just the ambient temperature of a closed building. It was a damp, penetrating chill that seemed to seep through the layers of my uniform and settle in my bones. I pushed through the double doors and emerged into the food court. The vast, open space was bathed in shadows. The moonlight filtering through the glass skylights cast long, skeletal shapes across the tables and overturned chairs. The neon signs of the food stalls were off, leaving the Pizza Palace and Burger Barn looking like derelict ruins of fallen civilization. As I walked, the sound of my footsteps echoed with sharp clack, clack, clack that seemed to repeat a second later than it should have, as if the echo were lagging behind or perhaps mocking me. I swept my flashlight beam across the empty expanse. Dust motes danced in the beam, swirling in patterns that looked almost deliberate. That's when I saw the first one. Standing near the entrance to the east wing was a mannequin. It was a standard display model, female, wearing a red sequin dress that probably cost more than my car. It was bald, its plastic head smooth and featureless, devoid of eyes or a mouth. But as my light washed over it, I felt a sudden, violent spike of adrenaline punch me in the gut. It was facing me. I froze. I knew, logically, that mannequins don't move. I knew that the window dressers probably positioned it that way to catch the eye of shoppers entering the food court. But the angle of the head, it was tilted slightly to the side in an attitude of listening. And though it had no eyes, I could feel a heavy, malevolent gaze boring into me. I laughed nervously, the sound weak and brittle. Okay, Elias, get a grip. It's a piece of plastic. I remembered the list. Rule number 1, ensure every mannequin wears a Santa hat by midnight. I checked my watch. 10:45 p.m. I had over an hour before the deadline. If this was a prank, I decided I would play along. It would pass the time, and if Henderson was watching on the cameras, I'd show him I was a good sport. I backtracked to the maintenance closet the note had mentioned. Sure enough, sitting on a rusted shelf was a large, black garbage bag. I opened it. Inside were dozens of cheap, felt Santa hats. They smelled of mildew and mothballs. I grabbed the bag, feeling ridiculous, and headed back out into the mall. The atmosphere in the mall was shifting. When I had first arrived, it felt empty. Now it felt occupied. The silence wasn't just an absence of noise. It felt like a hell breath. The shadows in the corners of my vision seemed to stretch and recoil when I turned my head. The festive decorations, the giant ornaments hanging from the ceiling, the garlands wrapped around the railings, took on a sinister quality. The tinsel looked like silver barbed wire. The oversized nutcrackers standing guard at the entrance of the toy store looked less like soldiers and more like executioners. I approached the mannequin in the red dress. Up close, it was even more unsettling. The plastic skin had a sheen to it that looked too much like sweat. I reached into the bag, pulled out a hat, and stood on my tiptoes to place on the smooth, bald head. As my fingers brushed against the plastic, I flinched. It was warm, not hot, but warm, like the warmth of a hand that had just let go of a coffee cup. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned, dropping the hat. It landed on the floor with a soft pat. Heating vents, I whispered to myself, my heart hammering against my ribs, just the heating vents blowing on it. I looked up. The nearest vent was 20 feet away. I swallowed the lump of fear in my throat, picked up the hat, and jammed it onto the mannequin's head. I didn't linger. I turned and walked briskly toward the next door, a high-end fashion boutique called Velour. There were 5 mannequins in the window display of velour. 3 men, 2 women. All of them were posed in unnatural, jagged angles, as if they were in the middle of convulsion. I unlocked the store with my master key. Another thing that felt wrong. Why did I have access to the interiors? And stepped inside. The air in the store was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, cloying and sweet. I moved quickly, Hat on the first one, hat on the second, hat on the third. As I reached the fourth mannequin, a tall male figure in a tuxedo, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was the sound of plastic dragging against the floor. It came from behind me, from the window display I had just finished. I spun around, flashlight raised like a weapon. The three mannequins I had just hatted were standing there, motionless, silent. But something was wrong. The female mannequin in the center, her head was turned. I was certain, absolutely certain, that when I put the hat on her, she was looking toward the street. Now, she was looking directly at the spot where I was standing. The red felt hat was slightly askew, giving her a jaunty, deranged appearance. "Stop it," I hissed, my voice trembling. "Stop creeping yourself out." I forced myself to turn back to the tuxedo mannequin. I jammed the hat onto its head. Then the last one. I backed out of the store, locking the glass door with shaking hands. When I looked back through the glass, the mannequin stood frozen in their silent tableau. But as the light from the hallway flickered, a sudden, violent strobe that lasted only a second, I could have sworn I saw their arms change position. Instead of reaching for each other, they were all reaching toward the door. Toward me. I checked my watch again. 11:15 p.m. The time was moving strangely fast. I still had the entire west wing and the upper level to go. There were dozens of mannequins. I began to run. The absurdity of the task had vanished. The cynicism was gone, replaced by a primal, driving instinct that told me the rules on that yellow paper were the only thing standing between me and something terrible. The mall was waking up. The low hum of the HVAC had deepened into a growl. The lights overhead buzzed with rhythmic intensity, like a heartbeat. I sprinted past the jewelry store, tossing hats onto the heads of neck busts. I vaulted over the counter of the sporting goods store, slamming hats onto the faceless athletes. Every time I touched them, I felt that sickening warmth. Every time I turned my back, I heard the subtle scritch of movement. I reached the central escalator. I had 15 minutes left until midnight. I had cleared the lower level, but the upper level was teeming with them. The department store anchor, Macy's, had a massive display right at the entrance to the second floor. I scrambled up the escalator, the metal steps groaning under my weight. I reached the top and skidded to a halt. There were so many of them, a choir of mannequins, arranged in tiers, dressed in winter coats and scarves. There must have been 30 of them, and I had 5 hats left in my bag. No, I muttered, panic rising in my chest like bile. I frantically looked around. I had to go back to the maintenance closet. There wasn't time. It was across the mall. 11:55 p.m. I stared at the army of plastic figures. They stood in perfect silence, their blank faces upturned as if waiting for a sermon. And then the lights in the entire mall cut out. Total darkness. For a second, the silence was absolute. Then a slow, red emergency light began to pulse in the distance, bathing the atrium in a bloody, intermittent glow. In the red flashes, I saw them. They had moved. The choir was no longer in tears. They had stepped down. They were crowding the top of the escalator, blocking my path. And in the crimson light, I saw that the ones without hats didn't just have blank faces anymore. Where their mouths had been, the plastic had split open, revealing jagged, hollow gashes that looked like screams frozen in time. I had 5 minutes to find 25 hats, or I was going to find out exactly what happens when you insult the residents of Northgate Mall. And the worst part, as I backed away, clutching my flashlight, I realized the bag of hats was heavy again. I looked down. The bag was full. It had refilled itself. The mall didn't want me to fail because I lacked supplies. It wanted me to play the game. It wanted to see how fast I could run. "Okay," I whispered, gripping the bag until my knuckles turned white. "You want a show? Let's go." I clicked my flashlight back on, the beam cutting to the red-tinted dark, and charged toward the horde. The game had begun, but I had no idea that the mannequins were just the opening act. As I plunged into the sea of plastic limbs and silent screams, I didn't know that the phantom caroler was clearing her throat, preparing for her solo. And deep in the bowels of the lost and found, a blue-wrapped package began to vibrate. The red emergency strobe washed the upper concourse of Northgate Mall in a rhythmic, bloody pulse. Flash, darkness, flash, darkness. In those strobe-lit moments, the world was reduced to a nightmare geometry of frozen plastic and frantic motion. I was a man possessed, tearing hats from the magically refilled black bag and jamming them on heads that felt far too much like flesh and bone. I didn't have time to process the impossibility of the situation. The logic of the daylight world had died the moment the lights went out. All that mattered was a countdown on my digital watch and a sea of expectant, faceless figures blocking my path. 11:57 p.m. I shoved past a cluster of children, mannequins dressed in winter parkas. They were heavy, their bases rooted to the floor with unnatural weight. As I forced my way through, I felt small, hard fingers brush against my thigh. I told myself it was just their rigid hands snagging on my uniform pants, but the sensation was distinct, a gripping, testing squeeze. I slapped the hat on a small, bald head, feeling the warmth radiating from it, and scrambled toward the back of the phalanx. 11:58 p.m. There were still 10 of them left. They were the parents, towering figures arranged in a semicircle near the entrance to Macy's. In the flashing red light, their jagged, split-open mouths seemed to widen with every pulse. They weren't just standing there anymore. They were leaning in, their torsos pivoted toward the center of the circle, toward me. The air in the center of that circle was hot, smelling of ozone and burning hair. "Come on!" I screamed, my voice cracking. I wasn't shouting at anyone in particular, just screaming to keep the crushing silence from filling my lungs. "Hat! Hat! Hat!" I moved with a fluid desperation, my flashlight clenched in my teeth, the beam dancing wildly across the ceiling. I reached a tall, female figure in a faux fur coat. As I raised the hat, my flashlight beam caught the hollow gash of her mouth. Deep inside the plastic throat, something glistened. It looked wet. It looked like saliva. I gagged but forced my hand down, crowding her with the festive felt. She didn't move, but a low vibration hummed through the floor, vibrating up through the soles of my boots. It was the sound of a massive generator spinning up, or perhaps a growl. 11:59 p.m. One left. It was positioned right at the edge of the glass railing, overlooking the dark abyss of the first floor. It was a male figure, one arm extended over the railing, as if pointing at something below. I lunged for it, the last hat in my hand. My foot caught on the base of a display table. I stumbled, my knees slamming into the hard tile. The hat flew from my grip, skittering across the polished floor, sliding toward the edge of the precipice. No! I scrambled on all fours, my flashlight clattering away. The hat slid closer to the drop, 10 feet away. 5, 2. I launched myself forward, a desperate dive that knocked the wind out of me. My fingers clamped onto the white pom-pom of the Santa hat just as it teetered on the brink. I didn't wait to recover. I rolled onto my back, looked up at the looming mannequin, and slammed the hat onto its head. Beep, 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 beep. My watch alarm signaled midnight. I lay there on the cold tile, chest heaving, staring up at the mannequin. The red emergency lights flickered once, a long, agonizing staccato, and then died completely. The mall was plunged into total, absolute blackness. I held my breath. Had I made it? Was the hat on straight? Did it count if I was on the floor? For 10 seconds, nothing happened. The silence was so profound I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Then, slowly, the main overhead lights sputtered back to life. Not the full brightness of the day, but the dim, yellowish security setting. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing my flashlight. I spun around, sweeping the beam over the display. The mannequins were back in their original tiers. The children were frozen in playful poses. The parents were looking straight ahead, their plastic faces smooth and unbroken. No jagged mouths. No wet throats. Just standard, department store dummies wearing cheap Santa hats. I let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Okay," I wheezed, wiping sweat from my eyes. "Okay, rule 1, done." But the mall wasn't done with me yet. As I turned to head back toward the security office, a sharp, metallic crack echoed through the atrium. It sounded like a gunshot. I ducked, spinning toward the sound. One of the glass panels on the railing, the one the final mannequin had been pointing over, had shattered. It hadn't fallen out, but it was spiderweb with thousands of cracks. And there, in the center of the destruction, was a perfect, foggy imprint of a human hand. A hand pressing from the outside of the glass. From the empty air of the atrium drop. Immediate consequence. I whispered, remembering the warning. I had cut it too close. The mall was expressing its displeasure. I didn't stay to investigate the handprint. I retreated to the security office, my legs feeling like jelly. I needed to regroup. I needed coffee. I needed to convince myself that I hadn't just hallucinated the last hour. Back in the safety of the concrete box, I collapsed into the chair. I checked the monitors. The screen showed grainy black and white views of the mall. Everything looked still. The mannequins were just gray blobs on the screen. I picked up the yellow list again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely read the text. Rule 2, the Phantom Caroler. Between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., do not acknowledge it. Do not hum along. Do not look up toward the source. I checked the time. 12:15 a.m. I had 45 minutes of reprieve. I spent the next half hour staring at the wall, trying to slow my heart rate. I drank lukewarm water from a plastic bottle and tried to rationalize what I had seen. Hypnagogic hallucinations. I told myself, stress-induced hysteria, carbon monoxide leak. But deep down I knew, the warmth of the plastic, the wetness in the throat, that wasn't hysteria. That was Northgate. At 12:55 a.m., I forced myself to leave the office. Henderson's instructions were clear. Follow the list. Staying in the office might seem safe, but the list didn't say hide in the office. It implied I had to exist in the space while these things happened. If I hid, I might be breaking a rule I didn't even know existed. I walked to the central atrium again. I chose a bench near the fountain, which had been drained for the winter. It gave me a 360-degree view of the lower level. I sat down, placed my flashlight on the bench beside me, and waited. 12:58 a.m. The hum of the refrigerator units in the distance seemed to fade away. 12:59 a.m. The air pressure dropped. I felt my ears pop, a sensation similar to driving up a mountain, but sharp and sudden. The temperature plummeted. I could see my breath pluming in the air before me in erratic, gray clouds. 1 a.m. It started with a hum, soft, melodic, and impossibly clear. It didn't sound like it was coming from a speaker system. It sounded acoustic, as if someone were standing on the balcony directly above me. Silent night. Holy night. The voice was female. It was beautiful, a soprano so pure it made the hairs on my arm stand up. But there was something wrong with the pitch. It was too perfect. It lacked the tiny tremors of human breath. It was a sound generated by something that understood the mathematics of music, but not the soul of it. I stared at my boots. Do not look up. Do not acknowledge it. All is calm. All is bright. The acoustics of the mall carried the sound in strange ways. One moment, it sounded like she was miles away in the West Wing. The next, it sounded like she was standing right behind my bench. I clenched my jaw, grinding my teeth together. The urge to look was overwhelming. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a physical compulsion. The voice was hooking into the primitive part of my brain that demands we identify the source of the sound. My neck muscles twitched, fighting the command to lift my head. Round yon virgin, mother and child, she was moving. I could hear the rustle of stiff fabric, like crinoline or ancient silk, brushing against the tiled floor of the upper level. Swish step, swish step. She was circling the atrium, looking down, looking for an audience. It's just the wind, I whispered to myself, violating the rule of silence, but desperate for a sound that was my own. Just events. The singing stopped abruptly. My heart slammed against my ribs. Had she heard me? Silence stretched for 10 seconds. Then the singing resumed, but the timbre had changed. It was deeper now, throatier, and it was closer. Holy infant, so tender and mild. She wasn't on the upper level anymore. I heard the distinct, rhythmic clack, clack, clack of heels on the escalator steps. She was coming down. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't look. Don't look. Don't look. I hunched my shoulders, making myself as small as possible. The air around me grew frigid, a cold so intense it burned my exposed skin. I could smell her perfume now, a rotting, floral scent, like lilies left on a grave for a week too long. Sleep in heavenly peace. The voice was right in front of me. I could feel the presence stand between me and the fountain. I could feel the displacement of the air. If I opened my eyes, I would see the hem of her dress. If I looked up, I would see her face. The compulsion to look became a physical pain, a migraine driving a spike behind my eyes. Look at me, the silence between the notes seemed to demand. Look at me and see what I have become. She began to hum. It wasn't the tune of Silent Night anymore. It was a discordant, spiraling melody that sounded like weeping set to music. She walked around the bench. I could hear the fabric sliding against the wood, inches from my arm. She leaned in. I felt a lock of ice-cold hair brush against my ear. Sleep? She crooned, the word drawn out into a hiss. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste copper. I focused entirely on the pain. The sharp, hot sting in my mouth was the only thing anchoring me to reality. I stared at the scuff mark on my left boot. That scuff mark was my universe. Nothing else existed. Not the smell of decay, not the cold hair, not the voice that promised eternal, frozen slumber. I am working, I said through gritted teeth, my voice steady despite the terror ripping me apart. I am just working. It was a gamble, a rejection of the performance, a statement that I was not an audience member, but a fixture of the mall, just like the trash cans or the benches. The presence froze. The humming stopped. For an eternity, she stood there, right behind my left shoulder. I could hear a sound like wet leather stretching, a slow, creaking noise. I realized with jolt of horror that she was bending down. She was bringing her face level with mine. If she moved into my peripheral vision, I would see her. If I saw her, I would acknowledge her. I closed my eyes tight. Nice try, a voice whispered. It wasn't a singing voice. It was a dry, raspy rattle, like dead leaves skittering on pavement. Maybe next year. A rush of cold air blasted past me, smelling of winter storms and old dust. The heavy atmosphere lifted instantly. The oppressive silence broke, replaced by the familiar, comforting hum of the HVAC system. I opened my eyes. I was alone by the fountain. I slumped forward, gasping for air, clutching my chest. I checked my watch. 3:01 a.m. I had survived the concert. I stood up, my legs trembling violently. I needed to move. I needed to get blood back into my extremities. I began to walk briskly toward the security hallway, intending to lock myself in the office until sunrise. I didn't care about the rounds anymore. I just wanted a wall between me and the atrium. But as I passed the lost and found office near the restrooms, I stopped. The door, which I had locked at the beginning of my shift, was ajar. A soft, rhythmic thumping sound was coming from inside. It sounded like a heartbeat, heavy and wet. Thump, 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 thump. I shined my flashlight through the crack in the door. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on the metal shelving unit in the corner. There, sitting alone on the middle shelf, was a box wrapped in brilliant blue paper with a silver bow. It wasn't just sitting there. It was expanding and contracting. The box was breathing. I remembered Rule 3. Under no circumstances, open the gift-wrapped package in the lost and found. I took a step back, intending to run, to flee to the other side of the mall. But then I saw it. The wrapping paper was torn at the corner, not by someone outside, but from something pushing from the inside. A small, pale finger was wiggling through the tear, beckoning me closer. And against every survival instinct I had, against every scream my brain was sending to my legs, I felt my feet take a step toward the door. The box wasn't just breathing. It was calling my name. Elias. The box whispered. And this time, the voice sounded exactly like my dead mother. Elias. The whisper wasn't coming from the speakers. It wasn't echoing from the atrium. It was originating from inside that box, muffled by the layers of glossy blue paper. Yet it hit my eardrums with the clarity of a bell struck in a silent room. It was my mother's voice. Not the weak, rasping voice of her final days in a hospice ward, but the vibrant, musical tone she had when I was a child. It was the voice that used to call me for dinner, the voice that read me stories to ward off the dark. And now, it was coming from a cardboard box in the lost and found a haunted mall at 3:05 a.m. I knew, with the cold, hard logic that still flickered in the back of my mind, that this was a trap. I knew Rule 3. Under no circumstances, open the gift wrap package. But logic is a frail shield when grief takes the wheel. The human heart is a traitorous thing. It will walk you off a cliff if it thinks there's a chance to see a loved one at the bottom. I stepped into the lost and found office. The room was small, lined with metal shelves crammed with the debris of forgotten lives. Umbrellas, single mittens, scuffed backpacks, and water bottles. But the air here was different. It didn't smell like the sterile, waxy scent of them all. It smelled of lavender and old books, my mother's scent. It was a sensory assault designed to bypass my defenses, a chemical warfare of nostalgia. The door clicked shut behind me. I didn't turn to check if it was locked. I couldn't look away from the package. The box sat on the center shelf at eye level. It was about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in paper that was a shade of blue so deep it seemed to absorb the beam of my flashlight. The silver bow on top was made of ribbon. Up close, it looked like spun mercury, liquid and shifting, maintaining its shape through some impossible surface tension. "Elias, it's cold in here," the voice whispered again. The box shuddered, the paper crinkling with the sound of dry skin rubbing together. "Let me out. I brought you something. I brought you a way out." My flashlight beam wavered. My hand was trembling so violently that the light danced across the shelves, making the shadows of the umbrellas look like long, spindly fingers grasping for me. "You're not real," I said. My voice was a stranger's, hoarse, desperate, pleading to be convinced otherwise. "Mom is dead. I buried her." "Did you?" The voice purred, shifting from comfort to a subtle, digging accusation. "Or did you just leave me there? You were always so busy, Elias, always working. But you can make it up to me now. Just untie the bow. It's so simple." I took another step closer. The pull was magnetic. It wasn't just auditory, it was physical. I felt a tug in my solar plexus, an invisible hook reeling me in. The box began to emit a faint, pulsating luminescence from beneath the paper, a soft blue glow that beat in time with my own racing heart. The most dangerous traps don't look like cages. They look like the things you miss the most. And right now, that box looked like forgiveness. I found myself standing directly in front of the shelving unit. The box was inches from my face. I could hear the wet, rhythmic thumping inside growing louder. Thump, 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 thump. It sounded like a fetal heartbeat, rapid and urgent. "Open it," the voice commanded, no longer whispering. It was authoritative now, the voice of a parent scolding a hesitant child. "Don't be rude, Elias. Open the gift." My hand moved without my permission. I watched my own fingers reach out, pale and shaking, hovering over the silver bow. The air around the box was freezing, a localized pocket of absolute zero that made the joints of my fingers ache. But the heat radiating from the package itself was intoxicating. It promised a warmth that would banish the bone-deep chill of this accursed mall forever. I brushed the tip of my index finger against the blue paper. It didn't feel like paper. It felt like flesh. It was warm, soft, and slightly damp. I recoiled, gasping, but the voice shifted again, becoming panicked. "No, don't stop. Please, Elias. It hurts. It's so tight. Help me." The screaming started then. It was a cacophony of agony, a loop recording of my mother's worst moments of pain, amplified to a deafening volume inside the small room. It was unbearable. Every instinct I had screamed at me to stop the noise, to help her, to do the only thing that would end the suffering. "Open the box." I'm sorry," I sobbed, tears blurring my vision. "I'm coming, Mom." I grabbed the silver bow. It was cold, unimaginably cold. It burned my skin like dry ice. But as my fingers closed around the loops of the ribbon, a sudden, violent clarity pierced through the haze of grief. The texture, the bow wasn't smooth. It was segmented. It felt like the vertebrae of a small animal. And as I gripped it, the ribbon writhed. It wasn't a bow. It was a knot of worms, painted silver, twisting and biting at my fingertips. I looked closer, my face inches from the package. The tear in the paper, where the pale finger had beckoned me earlier, it had widened. And through that tear, I saw something that froze a scream in my throat. There was no face inside. There was no head. Inside the box, nestled in the bed of what looked like bloody cotton, was a single massive eye. It was a goat's eye, rectangular pupil dilated, swimming in a yellow sclera. It stared directly at me, devoid of recognition, devoid of love. It was an eye of ancient, hungry malice. The voice kept screaming, "Help me, help me." But the eye just stared, unblinking, anticipating the feast. "You're not her," I whispered, the horror replacing the grief with a sudden, sharp rage. The voice stopped instantly. The screaming cut off as if a cord had been severed. The eye narrowed. "Smart boy," the voice said, but it wasn't my mother's voice anymore. It was a guttural, wet sound, like mud bubbling in a swamp. "But you touched the bow. You touched it." The box exploded into motion. The silver worms lashed out, wrapping around my wrist. They were impossibly strong, tightening like steel wires, cutting into my skin. The box lunged forward off the shelf, not falling, but leaping toward my face. I threw myself backward, screaming. The box clung to my wrist, a parasitic weight dragging my arm down. I slammed my arm against the metal shelving unit. Clang! The box held on. The blue paper was tearing, and beneath it, I could see dark, pulsating veins throbbing under a membrane of translucent skin. It was trying to fuse with me. I could feel a burning sensation spreading up my forearm, a necrosis that smelled of copper and ozone. "Get off!" I shrieked, fueled by pure animalistic panic. I slammed my arm again, harder this time, aiming the box directly at the sharp metal corner of the shelf upright. Splat! The impact was sickeningly wet. The box ruptured. It didn't break like cardboard. It burst like an overripe melon. A thick, black ichor sprayed across the room, coating my uniform, the shelves, and the floor. The grip on my wrist loosened instantly. I scrambled back, slipping on the black slime, kicking frantically to get away from the remains of the package. On the floor, amidst the tattered blue skin and the writhing silver worms, something was convulsing. It looked like a heart, a black, shriveled heart that was still beating, pumping that vile fluid onto the linoleum. I didn't wait to see if it would regenerate. I scrambled to my feet, my boots sliding in the muck, and threw my body against the door. It wouldn't budge. "No, no, no." I hammered on the handle. "Open." From behind me, a low, gurgling laughter filled the room. The black heart was growing. It was sprouting tendrils, rooting itself into the floor tiles, pulling itself upright. It was reforming. I grabbed a fire extinguisher, mounting the wall next to the door. With a roar of exertion, I swung the heavy red cylinder at the door handle. Crack! The mechanism shattered. I kicked the door open and tumbled out into the hallway, landing hard on my shoulder. I scrambled on all fours, scrambling away from the lost and found like a crab, my flashlight beam swinging wildly. I didn't look back until I was 20 feet away. The door to the lost and found slowly creaked shut. But just before it closed, I saw the black fluid seeping out from under the threshold, moving with purpose, flowing not downhill but toward me. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I ran past the restrooms, past the vending machines, back toward the dubious safety of the open atrium. My arm burned where the silver worms had touched me. I looked down at my wrist as I ran. There were welts there, raised, angry red lines that formed a pattern. I stopped under the emergency light, near the food court, to look closer. The welts weren't random scratches. They were letters. Branded into my skin were 3 words. Gift received. Pending. I dry heaved, clutching my wrist. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't fully unwrapped it, but I had touched it. I had engaged with the transaction. Pending. I whispered, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. What does pending mean? I checked my watch. 3:45 a.m. I had survived the Phantom Caroler. I had survived the lost and found. But I had been marked. The mall knew I was hurt now. It knew I was terrified. And like a shark sensing blood in the water, the atmosphere around me began to change. The air in the atrium grew heavy, pressurized. The silence was no longer empty. It was crowded. I could feel eyes on me from the shadowed balconies above. Not the plastic eyes of mannequins this time, but something older, something that lived in the architecture itself. The lights in the food court flickered, long, slow blinks that left me in total darkness for 5 seconds at a time. During the darkness, I heard footsteps, not the click of heels, not the scuff of plastic. These were heavy, wet footsteps. Slap, 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 like bare feet walking on wet concrete. They were coming from all directions. I backed up until my spine hit the cold grate of the closed pretzel twist kiosk. I raised my flashlight, but the beam was growing dim. The batteries were failing. Of course they were. Come on, Elias. I muttered, shaking the flashlight. Don't die in the food court. That's just embarrassing. I needed a defensible position. The security office was too far, and the service corridors felt like a death trap now. I needed somewhere open where I could see what was coming. I looked toward the center of the mall, the giant Christmas tree. It stood 40 feet tall, lit by its own internal power source, unaffected by the mall's flickering grid. It was a beacon of light in the gathering gloom. The base of the tree was surrounded by a white picket fence, a small enclosure meant to protect the presence, fake, empty boxes, from grabby children. I ran for the tree. As I sprinted across the open tile, the slap, slap, slap of the footsteps sped up. They were chasing me. I could hear panting now. Wet, rattling breaths that sounded like water and alum. I vaulted the white picket fence and landed among the fake gifts. I put my back against the trunk of the massive artificial tree, brandishing my dying flashlight like a sword. Come and get me, I yelled, the adrenaline turning my fear into a manic aggression. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the light cast by the tree. I peered into darkness, just beyond the reach of the Christmas lights. Shadows were moving, humanoid shapes, but wrong. Too long, too thin. They paced back and forth at the perimeter of the light, like wolves afraid of a campfire. I was safe for the moment. The light of the tree was holding them back. But then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Click. It came from the tree behind me. Click. It was the sound of a timer. I looked up at the towering green plastic mountain. The lights on the tree weren't eternal. They were on a timer. And if the mall schedule was anything like the rest of this hellhole, the festive lighting was set to turn off to save power in the deep hours of the morning. I checked my watch. 3:59 a.m. Usually, decorative lights turn off at 4 a.m. No, I whispered, looking at the pacing shadows. They seemed to know. They stopped pacing and turned toward me, crouching, ready to spring. The timer clicked again. Click. The giant tree went dark. The only light left was a dying yellow beam of my flashlight, flickering weakly in my hand. And from the darkness, the wet footsteps began to charge. I had 2 hours left until dawn, 2 hours until my shift ended. But as the shadows descended on the little picket fence, I realized the rules I had been following were just a tutorial. The real game was about to start. Midnight Madness wasn't just a catchy name for a sale. It was a promise. And as the first cold hand grabbed my ankle through the slats of the fence, I realized that the mall's true spirit was finally ready to claim its Employee of the Month. I kicked hard, feeling my boot connect with something that squished and scrambled up into branches of the tree. It was time to climb. The plastic branches of the 40-foot Christmas tree were sharp, scratching at my face and hands like pine-scented needles of glass. I scrambled upward, my boot slipping on the slick, artificial bark of the trunk, desperate to put distance between myself and the floor. Below me, in the pitch blackness of the atrium, the sounds of the hunt had erupted into chaos. Slap, slap, slap. The wet footsteps were everywhere now, a frenzied stampede of unseen things circling the base of the tree. The white picket fence splintered with a deafening crack as something massive plowed through it. I heard guttural snarls, the tearing of wrapping paper from the fake gift below, and the sickening sound of wet flesh colliding with metal. I didn't look down. I just climbed. Up. Just go up. I gasped, hauling myself onto a thick branch about 15 feet off the ground. The tree swayed ominously under my weight, the metal skeleton inside groaning in protest. I clicked my flashlight on and off, praying for a spark of life. The bulb flared once, a weak orange glow, and revealed the scene below for a split second. The floor of the atrium was a writhing sea of shadows. They weren't distinct figures anymore. They were a collective mass of elongated limbs and pale, translucent skin, scrambling over each other like crabs in a bucket. But in that brief flash, I saw faces. They were smooth, featureless, just like the mannequins. But these weren't made of plastic. They were made of something raw and unfinished, like dough that had been left to rot. And they were climbing the tree. I saw a hand, pale, four-fingered, and dripping with that black ichor from the lost and found, clamp onto the lower branches. My flashlight died for good. Darkness swallowed me whole again. Okay, I whispered, panic tightening my throat like a noose. Okay, Elias, think. I was blind, trapped in a giant plastic tree, with an army of unfinished abominations climbing up to drag me down. The only advantage I had was height, but they were fast. I could feel the vibrations in the trunk as they ascended, a rhythmic trembling that grew stronger with every second. Then, the mall changed the rules again. The air around me suddenly plummeted in temperature. My breath crystallized instantly, freezing on my lips. The wet, slapping sounds below stopped abruptly. The frenzied climbing ceased. Silence returned, but it was worse than the noise. It was a predatory silence. From the darkness above me, from the very top of the atrium, near the glass skylights, a new light appeared. It wasn't a lamp or a bulb. It was a cold, spectral blue mist that began to seep through the ceiling panels, swirling down like dry ice fog. It illuminated the upper reaches of the mall in a ghostly, underwater glow. And floating in the center of that mist, suspended 50 feet in the air, was the spirit of Northgate. It didn't look like a ghost. It looked like the mall itself given form. It was a towering construct made of debris, shattered glass, twisted rebar, torn shopping bags, and tangles of Christmas lights that pulsed with dark, necrotic energy. It had no face, only a swirling vortex of receipt paper and dust where a head should be. But I could feel its gaze. It was ancient, hungry, and entirely indifferent to my existence. This was the mall's true spirit, the rules had warned about, the entity that the rules were meant to appease. And I had failed. I had touched the package. I was pending. The entity raised a limb made of jagged metal and pointed down at me. Customer service required on level 2. A voice boomed. It wasn't a voice. It was a PA announcement, distorted and amplified to a deafening volume. Clean up an aisle? You. The blue mist descended rapidly, thickening around the tree. As it touched the branches below me, they withered. The plastic needles turned black and crumbled into dust. The metal frame of the tree began to rust instantly, creaking and groaning as it lost structural integrity. The spirit was decaying the reality around me. It was erasing my hiding spot. I had to move. I looked around desperately. To my left, about 10 feet away, was the second-floor balcony railing. It was a terrifying jump in the dark, especially from a swaying, rusting tree. But staying here meant being turned into dust along with the fake pine needles. The creatures below began to shriek, a high-pitched, electronic screech like feedback from a microphone. They resumed their climb, emboldened by their master's presence. I could hear them just below my feet now. A cold, wet hand brushed my boot. I kicked down blindly, connecting with something solid. A howl of pain echoed up, and the weight on the branch released. Now or never, I yelled. I scrambled further out onto the branch I was standing on. It bent alarmingly under my weight, the metal whining. The railing looked miles away in the shifting blue light. I crouched, coiled my muscles, and launched myself into the void. For a second, I was weightless, suspended in the cold, blue air. Then gravity took hold. I slammed into the metal railing of the second floor, the impact knocking the wind out of me. My ribs screamed in protest as I hooked my arms over a bar, my legs dangling over the drop. I scrambled over the railing, tumbling onto the carpeted floor of the upper level walkway. I didn't stop to breathe. I rolled to my feet and ran. Behind me, I heard a massive crash. The Christmas tree had collapsed. The rusted metal frame had given way, sending the plastic giant and the swarm of creatures plummeting to the ground floor. A cloud of dust and debris billowed up from the atrium, momentarily obscuring the blue light of the spirit. I sprinted toward the department store anchor at the end of the hall, J.C. Penney. It had heavy fire doors. It had hiding spots. Membership revoked. The PA voice boomed, the sound shaking the floorboard beneath my feet. The blue mist was flowing over the railing now, moving faster than I could run. It was chasing me down the corridor. As it passed the storefronts, the glass windows exploded outward, showering the walkway with shards. The mannequins inside the stores animated, slamming their fists against the empty air, screaming silently. I reached the entrance to J.C. Penney. The metal gate was pulled down, locked tight. Damn it! I screamed, rattling the bars. Open up. I looked back. The blue mist was 50 feet away. In the swirling fog, I could see the spirit reforming, its jagged metal body coalescing from the debris of the destruction it was causing. It was growing larger, filling the entire width of the hallway. I was trapped, gate in front, monster behind. Then I remembered the key, the master key I had used to unlock the lure for the hat rule. I fumbled in my pocket, my fingers slick with sweat and the black slime from the package. I pulled out the heavy brass ring. The key for the anchor stores was huge, old-fashioned. I jammed it into the control box on the wall next to the gate. I turned it. Click. A hum of electricity. The gate began to rise. Slowly, agonizingly slowly. Creak, clank, creak, clank. It was rising inch by inch. 6 inches. A foot. The blue mist was 20 feet away. The cold was unbearable now. Frost was forming on my eyebrows. I could hear the grinding of metal gears inside the spirit's body, the sound of 1,000 trash compactors crushing bone. Faster. I yelled at the gate. 18 inches. Enough to roll under. I dropped to the floor and rolled. My shoulder scraped against the bottom of the rising metal grate. I tumbled into the dark store just as the blue mist slammed against the gate. I scrambled up and hit the close button on the inside control panel. The gate reversed, descending with a crash. Bang! Something hit the gate from the outside. The metal bowed inward, denting on the force of the blow. Bang! Another hit. The lock rattled. I backed away into the darkness of the department store. J.C. Penney was a labyrinth of clothing racks and perfume counters. It was silent in here, protected, for now, from the chaos outside. But I wasn't safe. I checked my wrist. The welts were glowing now. The words pending were pulsing with a rhythmic red light. The spirit couldn't get into the gate, but it had marked me. It knew exactly where I was. I ran deep into the store, heading for the employee back-of-house area. I needed an exit, a fire escape, a loading dock, anything that led to the snowy parking lot and the real world. I found the double doors marked employees only. I pushed through them into a concrete corridor lined with lockers. At the end of the hall was a red door with a push bar. Emergency exit. Alarm will sound. Let it sound. I panted. Wake up the whole damn county. I sprinted toward the door. I could smell the fresh, cold air of winter just on the other side. Freedom. I slammed my hands against the push bar. It didn't move. I pushed again, putting my shoulder into it. It was welded shut. I looked closely at the door frame. The metal wasn't welded by heat. It was fused by a thick gray substance that looked like hardened chewing gum and concrete. The mall had sealed the exits. No! I slid down the door, despair finally cracking my resolve. You can't keep me here. Store closing in 60 minutes, the PA voice whispered. This time, the voice came from the speaker right above my head. All shoppers must be finalized. Finalized, not exited. Finalized. I looked down the hallway back toward the sales floor. The shadows were lengthening. The fluorescent lights in the corridor began to pop, one by one, showering sparks and glass. Pop, pop, pop darkness was advancing toward me, and in the flickering strobe of the dying lights, I saw them. The mannequins, the ones from the sales floor. They were standing at the end of the hallway. Dozens of them. They weren't running. They were just standing there, blocking the way back. But they had changed. They were wearing my clothes. One was wearing a security uniform, just like mine. One was wearing the jeans I had worn to the interview. One was wearing my favorite hoodie. They were a collection of me. And the one in the front, the one wearing security uniform, it didn't have a blank face. It had a face that was slowly molding itself into my features. It had my nose, my chin, but where my eyes should be, there were just hollow, black pits. It raised a hand and pointed at me. Shift change. It rasped in a voice that was a perfect recording of my own. I scrambled to my feet. I couldn't go back. I couldn't go out. There was only one place left to go, the freight elevator. I saw the heavy steel doors to my left, the freight elevator that went down to the basement loading docks. If the loading dock doors were sealed, I was trapped in the basement with these things. But if they weren't, I hit the call button. The light didn't turn on. The elevator was dead. The doppelganger Elias took a step forward. The others followed. Step, step, step. Unison. I looked around frantically. There was a pry bar mounted on the wall for fire emergencies. I grabbed it. It was heavy, solid steel. I jammed the tip of the pry bar into the crack between the elevator doors. I pulled with everything I had left. My muscles burned, the branded wrists screaming in agony. Groan. The doors parted slightly. An inch. 2 inches. Come on. I roared, veins bulging in my neck. The doppelganger was 10 feet away. It was smiling now, a cruel, empty smile. I gave one final, desperate heave. The doors slid open wide enough for me to squeeze through. I didn't look to see if the car was there. I just jumped into the shaft. There was no car. I fell into the darkness, grabbing blindly at the grease-covered cables. My hands slipped, burning with friction. I hit something hard. The top of the elevator car stopped the floor below. I landed with a sickening crunch. My ankle twisted violently, sending a bolt of white-hot pain up my leg. I screamed, the sound echoing up the shaft. Above me, through the open doors, I saw the face of the doppelganger peering down. It watched me with those hollow eyes. Then it leaned in and whispered down the shaft. Going down. It reached out and hit the button on the wall. The button I couldn't reach from inside the hallway. The cables above me groaned. The brakes on the elevator car disengaged with a loud clunk. The car beneath me lurched. We weren't going up. We were going down, past the basement, past the loading docks. The elevator was descending into the sublevels of Northgate Mall, into the foundations, into the dark, beating hard the place. And as the car plummeted, gaining speed, I realized a terrifying truth. The rules weren't there to help me survive the night. The rules were the interview process, and I had passed the first round. Now, I was heading to orientation. The sensation of falling in the dark elevator shaft is not like the movies. There is no wind rushing past your ears, only the terrifying displacement of air and mechanical scream of rusted cables unspooling faster than physics should allow. The car beneath me didn't just plummet. It was being pulled, dragged down into the earth by a force that felt heavy with gravity and malice. I flattened myself against the cold, greasy metal of the car roof, gripping the safety hatch handle until my fingernails bent backward, screaming into the void as the floors flashed by in a blur of gray concrete. Basement 1, Basement 2, Sublevel 3. The numbers painted on the shaft walls became incomprehensible symbols, ancient sigils that hurt my eyes to look at. The air pressure spiked, popping my ears violently. The temperature rose, shifting from a freezing chill of the atrium to a humid, cloying heat that smelled of wet rot and copper. This was the throat of the beast, and I was being swallowed whole. With a bone-shaking thud, the elevator car slammed into the dampeners at the bottom of the shaft. The impact threw me hard against the cable housing. My vision white-outed, a high-pitched ringing drowning out the mechanical groans of the settling car. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, checking my limbs. My ankle throbbed with a dull, sickening heat, but nothing else seemed broken. I rolled onto my side and looked up. The shaft above was a square tunnel of infinite darkness. The doors I had pried open were a distant pinpoint of light, miles away. There was no climbing back up. Welcome to human resources. I wheezed, the irony tasting like blood in my mouth. I looked around the top of the car. There was a maintenance ladder on the wall of the shaft, leading down to a set of double doors positioned level with the car. These weren't standard elevator doors. They were heavy, oak doors with brass handles, looking completely out of place in the industrial grime of the shaft. A small, polite plaque next to them read, "Management." I had no choice. I climbed down the short ladder, favoring my good leg, and stood before the doors. My wrist burned. I looked at the brand. The red light of pending had stopped pulsing. It was now a steady, solid crimson. I pushed the doors open. I expected a dungeon. I expected a slaughterhouse. What I found was a pristine 1980s-style executive office. Thick, plush carpet swallowed the sound of my boots. The walls were paneled in dark wood. In the center of the room sat a massive mahogany desk, and behind it, a leather chair faced a far wall, which was covered in a bank of monitors showing every corner of the mall above. "You're late, Elias," a voice said. The chair swiveled around. Sitting there wasn't a monster. It wasn't the goat-eyed abomination from the box or the trash construct spirit. It was a man. He looked remarkably average, wearing a tan suit that had been out of fashion for 40 years. But his skin was too smooth, like wax, and when he smiled, his teeth were a little too uniform, a little too white. "Mr. Henderson?" I stammered, recognizing the day's shift guard. "Henderson is unavailable," the entity said, his voice smooth and devoid of inflection. He didn't have the stamina for the night shift. He quit, effectively immediately. We processed his resignation about 10 minutes ago. He gestured to one of the monitors. On the screen, I saw the security office. Henderson was sitting in the chair, slumped forward over the desk, his eyes wide and glassy, a look of frozen terror on his face. He wasn't breathing. "We have a vacancy," the entity continued, folding his hands on the desk. "And you, Elias, have shown remarkable potential. You followed the rules. Mostly, you adapted. You survived the hazing." "I want to leave," I said, my voice shaking but firm. I gripped the pry bar I had carried down with me, though it felt like a toothpick against this kind of power. "Leave." The entity laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Nobody leaves Northgate, Elias. We are a family. We consume together. We exist together. Look at your wrist." I looked down. The word pending was fading. In its place, new letters were searing themselves into my flesh, agonizingly slow. "S-T-A. Staff," I whispered. "Permanent staff," the entity corrected. "You see, the mall is hungry. It eats time. It eats memories. It eats the years people waste wandering our halls, buying things they don't need to impress people they don't like. But we need caretakers. We need shepherds for the flock. The mannequins, they are the interns. But you have management material written all over you." He stood up, and as he did, his form flickered. For a second, I saw the truth beneath the tan suit, a swirling vortex of blue mist and jagged metal. The true spirit of them all. "Sign the contract, Elias," he said, holding out a pen. "Accept your role. The benefits are eternal life. No more rent. No more hunger. Just a mall." I looked at the pen. I looked at the monitors showing the desolate, haunted corridors of the world above. I looked at Henderson's corpse. "What time is it?" I asked. The entity frowned, a ripple in his waxen skin. "Time is irrelevant here." "It's relevant to me," I said. I glanced at the clock on the wall behind him. It was an old analog clock, ticking loudly. 5:55 a.m. "My shift ends at 6 a.m., I said, tightening my grip on the pry bar. "Henderson told me to survive until 6 o'clock. "That's the deal," That's the contract I signed with the security company. The entity sneered. That contract is void in this jurisdiction. Maybe, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But you love rules, don't you? Rule 1. Rule 2. You're obsessed with protocol. And according to labor laws, you can't force an employee to work overtime without consent. I was gambling everything on the logic of bureaucracy, the twisted, orderly nature of the mall itself. The entity paused. The blue mist swirled violently beneath the skin of his face. Technically accurate. I do not consent, I shouted, stepping back toward the elevator shaft. I am clocking out. The entity roared, a sound of twisting metal and shattering glass. Then you are fired. The room exploded into chaos. The wood paneling peeled away to reveal rotting flesh. The carpet turned into black sludge. The entity lunged across the desk, his jaw unhinging to reveal a mouth full of needle-like teeth. I didn't wait. I turned and dove back through the oak doors into the elevator shaft. But I didn't climb up. I knew I couldn't make the climb in 5 minutes. Instead, I looked down. Below the dampeners, there was a grate, a drainage grate, and through the slats, I could hear the rushing sound of water. The municipal storm drains. The only part of the mall connected to the outside world that wasn't sealed by magic or concrete. Severin's package. I yelled, jamming the pry bar into the grate. The entity crashed through the doors behind me, his human guise gone. He was a towering monstrosity of debris and hate, reaching for me with claws made of rebar. I put all my weight on the bar. Snap! The rusted bolts gave way. The grate swung open. I dropped into the icy, rushing water just as the rebar claws slashed the air where my head had been. I was swept away instantly. The water was freezing, a shock that nearly stopped my heart. It tasted of sewage and runoff, but it was moving. It was flowing. I tumbled through the darkness, scraping against concrete pipes, holding my breath until my lungs burned. I was being flushed out of system. I tumbled for what felt like miles. Just as the black spots in my vision threatened to turn into permanent darkness, I saw a gray light ahead. I kicked, fighting the current, propelling myself toward the opening. I burst out a culvert pipe and landed face first in the snowbank. I gasped, coughing up filthy water, clawing at the frozen ground. The air was sharp and clean. The sky above was a pale, pre-dawn gray. I rolled onto my back, staring up at the clouds. Snow was falling, gentle, silent snow. I lay there for a long time, shivering uncontrollably, listening to the silence of the morning. It was real silence, not the heavy, expectant silence of mall, but the peaceful quiet of a sleeping world. I checked my watch. 6:01 a.m. I had made it. I struggled to my feet, my twisted ankles screaming in protest. I was in a drainage ditch on the far side of the highway, about a half-mile from Mall. I looked back at the massive structure. Northgate Mall sat on a hill, looking like a fortress of gray concrete. The lights were off. It looked dead, dormant. I limped toward the road. I didn't have a car. I had taken the bus. But I didn't care. I would walk home if I had to. I would walk until my feet bled, just to get away from that place. I reached the highway shoulder and flagged down a passing salt truck. The driver, a bearded man with kind eyes, pulled over. "Rough night, son?" he asked, looking at my soaked uniform and the black slime drying on my coat. "You have no idea," I whispered. "Just get me out of here." He drove me into town. I didn't look back at the mall. Not once. It's been 3 days since Christmas Eve. I quit the security job over the phone. I didn't ask for my paycheck. I didn't ask about Henderson. I just told him I was done, and then I blocked the number. I've been trying to sleep, but the dreams are bad. In my dreams, I'm back in the atrium, and the mannequins are all wearing my face, and they're all clapping, welcoming me to the team. I thought it was over. I really did. I thought I had beaten the system. But this morning, I went to my mailbox. Inside, there was a single envelope, no return address. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, and expensive. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and stale floor wax. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a check for an amount that made my knees weak. It was enough to pay my rent for 5 years, enough to clear my debts, enough to start over. And wrapped around the check was a note, typed on that same yellow paper from the clipboard. Payment for services rendered. Night shift, December 24th, 2025. Performance rating, exemplary. Note, we accept your resignation from the security position. However, as per Article 4, subsection C of the protocol, you accepted upon survival. You have been promoted. Position, regional manager. Start date, Christmas Eve, 2026. See you soon, Elias. I dropped the letter. I ran to the bathroom and scrubbed my wrist. I scrubbed it with steel wool until the skin was raw and bleeding. But the brand is still there. The word pending is gone. The word staff never finished forming. Instead, in neat, scarred letters that glow faintly when the lights go out, is a new title. Owner, I survived the night shift. But I realized too late that you don't survive Northgate Mall. You just become part of the inventory. And next Christmas, I have a feeling I'm going to be the one making the rules.